Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Let's start the class. And since we started by 2:07, we will be continuing till 4:07, something like that. Right. So today we are continuing with some of the current affairs topics with regard to agriculture. Give the heading as zero budget natural farming, ZBNF, ZBNF or zero budget natural farming. I think you can hear me very well. The voice is clear. Is there any issue with the voice?
Yes, ma'am.
There is? Okay. You can't hear me properly?
No, it's fine, ma'am.
Oh, it's fine. Okay, fine. Okay, then we'll start the class. Zero budget natural farming. First of all, understand it's a method of natural farming, a chemical-free agriculture on it. So chemical-free agricultural process, which is a natural process. But understand one thing before we start anything about ZBNF, one thing you need to understand, ZBNF is not equal to organic farming. Have this concept very, very clearly. This is not organic farming. This is not organic farming. So this concept should be very clear. Now let's get into what is meant by zero budget natural farming. The concept ZBNF, this concept was was promoted by an agriculturalist called as Subhash Palekar. Subhash Palekar was the person who started or who promoted this idea of zero budget natural farming. It is a method of chemical free agriculture which borrows some of the traditional farming practices which has been practiced for many years together. Like traditional ആയിട്ട് നമ്മൾ follow ചെയ്യുന്ന ചില practices നോക്കും. We are following when we practice chemical free, which means I'm not using artificial chemical fertilizers or any artificial pesticides. അങ്ങനെ follow ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു practice ആണ് zero budget natural farming. So if I have to give it as a definition, I would tell you this, that is, it is a chemical free agricultural practice that borrows practices, traditional Indian agricultural practices, that borrows heavily from traditional Indian agricultural practices. It is opposite to green revolution. It is opposite to green revolution. Why? Because what happens in green revolution, we are using some high grade fertilizers, pesticides and everything. Zero budget natural farming says, please do not use such fertilizers. So it is against, or you can say it's completely opposite to green revolution. And it is essentially dependent on four pillars. When I'm talking about ZBNF, immediately we have to talk about the four pillars of ZBNF. The words are Sanskritized words, so but you have to remember the words. First word is Jivamrita. Jivamrita. Second one, Bijamrita. Bijamrita. Third one, mulching. Mulching, also known as Achadana. And finally, number four, it is Wafasa, which is soil aeration. Wafasa, it's WHAPHASA. Wafasa, which is also called as soil aeration. Let us try to understand each of them separately. Starting from the first one, which is Jivamrita. Here, we are trying to have some some fertilizers, but not your artificial fertilizers. The fertilizer here we are talking about, it's quite different. Fresh cow dung, Okay, Jeevamrita എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഇതൊരു ഫെർട്ടിലൈസർ ആണ്, പക്ഷെ നാച്ചുറൽ ഫെർട്ടിലൈസർ ആണ്. So we are taking fresh cow dung, urine, cow dung, cow urine, mix it along with jaggery. Some amount of jaggery has to be added, and then some water is added to it, and then we mix it and we apply it to the soil. I repeat, so the main constituents are three components: uh, cow dung, cow urine, and jaggery. So these three are to be mixed along with the water and soil, and it is applied in the form of, it is mixed along with water and soil, and it is applied in the form of natural fertilizers. All right. Then comes Bijamrita. So it's if you see this Bijamrita, it's actually talking about pesticide management, or it's actually, we are talking about a pesticide. This is actually a fertilizer, but a natural fertilizer. This is actually a natural pesticide. It is having pesticidal property. You can write like that. This is something where we are talking about a pesticidal property, which means I'm going to, here comes the property of neem leaves. Neem leaves. Neem leaves. It is taken, neem leaves is taken, and mostly this is the most important component with regard to Bijamrita. But apart from this, they also use sometimes, or you can say in some cases, these are a major component. Sometimes in some other cases, some minor components are also used, like tobacco, green chili, and they are applied on the seeds. The seeds are first of all treated with these kinds of substances, and after that they are sown to the soil. I repeat, the seeds are first of all treated with this kind of a mixture of neem leaves, tobacco, പിന്നെ green chili, ഇതൊക്കെ വെച്ചിട്ട് ഒരു mixture ആണ്. അതിന് ഒത്തിരി പെസ്റ്റിസൈഡൽ പ്രോപ്പർട്ടീസ് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. Because when we are talking about neem leaf, neem it's obviously having some pesticidal properties. So neem leaves, major component ആണ്. Apart from that, tobacco plus green chili together, it becomes the or it makes up the pesticide, the natural pesticide, when we are talking about ZBNF technique. Jeevamrita എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു നാച്ചുറൽ ഫെർട്ടിലൈസർ ആണ്. പെസ്റ്റിസൈഡ്, ബിജാമൃത എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ അതൊരു നാച്ചുറൽ പെസ്റ്റിസൈഡൽ പ്രോപ്പർട്ടിയാണ്. Now coming to this one, achadana എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ, I have given here, it is mulching technique. So whatever previously നമുക്ക് ആ ഒരു ഫീൽഡിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു ക്രോപ്സ് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ, just leave it out, just leave the residual parts of the particular harvested crop. ഇപ്പോൾ let's assume rice ആണ് നമ്മൾ ഹാർവെസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആ റൈസിന്റെ കുറെ ആ ഒരു ക്രോപ്പിന്റെ റെസിഡ്യൂ കാണുമല്ലോ, just leave it on the field and bury it inside the soil. That's the property of mulching. Mulching is one of the most important pillar of ZBNF, and very importantly, underline this point is very important. What I'm going to say can even come for your prelims. ZBNF mostly tries for no tillage or minimum tillage. ശരിക്കും no tillage is the correct word, not even minimum tillage, no tillage ആണ്. No tillage എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ, what is tilling the soil? Tilling the soil എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ, tillage or tilling the soil എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ, I am mixing, or you can say I'm mixing my topsoil with the sublayer. I'm mixing of topsoil with the sub-layered soil. So what happens is, tilling cheyumbol, there is a chance that when any field, follow me closely, any field which is tilled, tillage ചെയ്യുന്നത് കഴിയുമ്പോൾ, there is a high chance that it can be very much susceptible to either wind erosion or water-based erosion. So tillage is a very bad property. I mean, ZBNF says that it is to be absolutely not followed. And പറയുമ്പോൾ tillage will mix the topsoil and the subsoil. So fertility will be replenished. So tillage in the മറ്റൊരു concept ആണ് mulching. Mulching എന്ന് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ whatever residues come in that field, we are just burying it within the field. So that will also conserve your soil. At the same time, it will prevent erosion also. It will conserve the nutrients. At the same time, it will prevent the erosion properties. Coming to Wafasa. Wafasa means aeration of the soil. It is the condition you are aerating the soil. You are adding, you are leaving the soil fallow for some time, aerating it, exposing it to the atmosphere. These are the this is what we call it as soil aeration. Leaving it fallow for some time, exposing it to the atmospheric condition, exposing it to the atmosphere, so that what happens is the soil has two components: soil air, we call it as soil air, and soil water. Every soil in this world has some part of air molecules in it. It's not completely solid. There is some gaps in the soil molecules, and that's filled by air. So this soil aeration makes sure that the soil is good. It's in good condition. So there is a certain amount of soil air, and there is another component called a soil water. Naturally, how much molecule of water is present in certain portion of soil. So these two characters depend on soil aeration. How much are you exposing your soil to the atmospheric conditions? Is it able to absorb the rainwater? Is it able to, are you leaving the land fallow so that it can absorb the soil? I mean, the atmospheric air. The atmospheric air, can it absorb it? ഇതിനൊക്കെ ഡിസൈഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ് this property of Wafasa, which is also called as soil aeration, Okay, so these are the 4 pillars with regard to ZBNF. Now let's continue this discussion. Benefits of ZBNF. What are the issues related to ZBNF? That's what we are going to see now. Please take running notes. I'm not sure if this would be available in your regular notes, which I would give you. So there is 2 things that you need to follow. One is your regular Puller book. Puller does not have ZBNF. The second thing is the notes that I give you in the form of printed material. I don't think this will also have it. The third thing is my running notes, the notes that I dictate and the notes that you take. So rely on this part for ZBNF and for the next part that I'm going to tell, which is vertical farming techniques. Please take some running notes that will help you. All right. Let's see. So, okay. So ZBNF, 4 components has been done. 4 pillars has been done. Was the person, and it is not same as organic farming. Let's continue. What is the benefits of ZBNF? Benefits of ZBNF. Give the heading as benefits of ZBNF. First thing is the inputs that you need for a practice that is ZBNF. The inputs, the cost of the inputs is very, very, very minimalistic. It is minimalistic requirement, or the cost of inputs is very, very, very minimum. On the other hand, if I'm talking about the regular agricultural practices, first of all, I need to buy HYV seeds, high yielding variety of seeds, in fertilizers, chemical pesticides. Those are very, very costly. So cost wise, it is helping the farmers come out of debt. Farm debt in avoid cheyyunnundu. Also, it's very, very, very cheap. The inputs are very, very cheap. And another thing is, second point is, it is highly environment friendly. It's highly environment friendly. because we are not using anything that is that's chemical. Substances naturally derived components are, so it's very much favorable for the environment also. And then this technologies of um, soil aeration, these are things which has been there. What we call in the definition are the soil as ZPNF in the definition നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, traditional Indian agricultural practices, the soil aeration, that component is a traditional practice. It is a very traditional practice. Similarly, there are many other advantages with regard to ZPNF. That is my minimal watering, no tillage. Minimal watering and no tillage. Minimal watering. Watering is very minimum. So minimal watering, no tillage, mulching, all of this are practices of traditional practices, plus it's environmental friendly, plus it prevents soil erosion. It tries to maintain the fertility of the soil. You can write many points with regard to each of these practices. If I'm talking about mulching, I can say that it prevents erosion. If I'm talking about minimum watering, it's environmental friendly. Similarly, if I'm talking about zero tillage, that is also preventing erosion. So many advantages are there with regard to each of the things which you do in ZPNF. All right. So roughly these are the benefits. And remember, Andhra Pradesh was the first state to practice ZDNF on a commercial basis. Andhra Pradesh was the state. In fact, it has been promoted. It was promoted as a part of governmental policy. The chief minister himself advised the farmers to practice the technology of ZBNF. Okay, so that is the thing about this. Now, what is the issues related to ZBNF? What is the issues related to ZBNF? First thing is yield. Yield. Then we are talking about any natural farming practices. The yield cannot be as competitive like what you observe in the conventional farming methodology. Okay, so that's one reason why farmers are not finding natural farming techniques or organic farming techniques as attractive. They're not attracted by these new age technologies, or not new age technologies. They're not attracted towards these new farming practices which is being encouraged by the government. Organic farming ആയാലും പിന്നെ ZBNF ആയാലും, the government is not very like, farmers are not very happy with these kind of techniques because of the poor yield when compared to the conventional farming practices. Why is the yield poor? Understand something, in conventional farming practices we are utilizing chemical fertilizers, pesticides. Naturally the yield will be very high in the conventional way. That's one thing. Now, second thing is the farmers are not getting revenue because of the using these kinds of technology. The health of the soil is definitely getting improved. That's one advantage. They have seen that the health of the soil is getting improved, but the health of the agriculture that they practice is not getting improved. They are still in debt. They are still in they are still caught in the poor economic cycles because of the low yield or low productivity with regard to ZPNF. Now, another thing is ZBNF talks about having what, cow dung, cow urine. Now, cow dung, cow urine, and all, how much quantities will you get it? If I'm going to practice on a commercial basis, and if I'm going to practice ZBNF in a commercial basis, tell me how much kgs of cow urine and cow dung do I need? So this is not practicable. This is not practicable. The countries cattle population, it does not support large scale commercialization with regard to ZPN. Okay, so these are roughly the issues as well as with regard to the benefits with regard to ZPNF, benefits and issues. Now, as a conclusion, maybe you can write, we can write that government needs to market products as though it's completely organically farmed. It is completely done in methods of zero budget natural farming. Maybe a logo, like what we have done for organic certification ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട് നമുക്ക് അതുപോലെ we need certification for ZPNF so that consumers are attracted towards such products. So first thing is we need to bring about consumer awareness. Second thing is marketing of ZBNF, maybe a logo for ZBNF product, trademark for ZBNF product. ഇതൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് കൊണ്ടുവരണം. It should be a part of governmental policy itself. Even for ZBNF crops, the government should have, and accordingly, the government should decide a price, an MSP, based on the fact whether they are practicing conventional farming practices or are they practicing ZBNF. So in a point, if you have to write, government has to bring about ZBNF based MSP prices. If farmer is practicing ZBNF, he should have a differentiated price. Farmer is practicing ZBNF technology, he should be having a differentiated price when compared to the conventional farmers. And most importantly, NREGA can be interlinked with ZBNF farms, so that the agricultural laborers, so that the laborers can be used to cultivate the crops with regard to ZBNF farms. This will be a double advantage because the workers will also get a job. The farmers will also get laborers to work in his or her field. The farmers will also get laborers to work in his or her field. So it's a win-win situation for both of them. It's a win-win situation for both of them. All right, that is about ZBNF. The most important point is you should not forget the 4 Sanskrit words and you should not forget the corresponding meaning to it. All right, any doubts in ZBNF? Right, let's go to the next one. Now, what's the next one is about? It is about, give the heading as vertical farming. Vertical farming. Someone has asked something? No. Okay. Now, we'll give the heading as vertical farming. Wait 1 second. Let me see if I have covered everything. Yes, one point with regard to organic farming. I mean, your ZBNF just added. just add this point because this is important. Some 2, 3 points with regard to prelims perspective, just add that. There is this concept of vermicomposting. Heard of this? There is this concept of vermicomposting. Now, what is vermicomposting? Now, what is vermicomposting? Vermicomposting, I'm talking about. Okay, I'm talking about vermicomposting. I'm talking about having a set of worms. I will have, let's say that I have some vegetable waste, some fruit waste and stuff like that. So even in the top of my apartment, there is a vermicompost. So what do they do there? So they have something like this. I'm talking about my own apartment where I stay. At the top of the roof, they have something like this, and we go and dump all our vegetable waste, fruit waste, all the kitchen waste that we have. It's dumped there. Then we deposit a layer of some amount of uh, substances, not chemical substances, a natural manure kind of thing, where there will be small worms. So this is deposited on top of this vegetable waste or whatever waste that we have produced. Now this worms will act on these material and you will have natural manure. Now this is called as vermicomposting. Now you may ask a question or UPSC may ask a question is, can vermicomposting be a part of ZBNF? So ZBNF, there can be 1, 2, 3, 4 option and one of them can be vermicomposting. Now, always understand zero budget natural farming does not agree with the concept of vermicomposting. It is not agreeable to the concept of vermicomposting. Not agreeable, whatever. Vermicomposting is not a component of ZBNF. This usage of worms for agriculture and getting the manure out of that worms, uh, that becomes a part of organic farming, and that's not zero budget natural farming. Now, the only manure that this zero budget natural farming takes up, the only manure that they take up is your Jivamrita. Is Jivamrita, nothing more than that. Vermicomposting is definitely not a part of ZBNF, but vermicomposting can be a part of my organic farming practice. Got it? That's one point that I missed. Let's see if I have missed something else. Yes, I have told this point also. Tilling is compulsorily not allowed with regard to ZPNF. When we are talking about organic farming, tilling, the practice is allowed. Tilling is allowed. So that's another point. That is about it. Yeah, that's all. That's all. So one point that we have missed out is with regard to vermicomposting. Remember vermicomposting. Fine. Let's move on to the next concept, which is what is it? Vertical farming techniques. This one, let me tell you, very recently, Kerala government said we should be encouraging more and more vertical farmers. We should be encouraging more and more vertical farmers. So this can be something that if you're preparing for KS, it can be important, or for prelims also, because vertical farming practices is always important with respect to prelims. And these are things you can write it as new age agriculture with regard to your options. So it has got multiple purposes. So make sure that you are taking some running notes. Right. Vertical farming. What do you mean by this? Suppose let's say that I have a garden. I'm talking about a garden, not a farm. I'm talking about a garden, and in that garden, I have a place like this where I have some stacks. Stacks, no, remember some shelves. And what I do is I have a planter here, and I'm cropping some planter എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഇങ്ങനെ Amazon മറ്റേ ഫ്ലിപ്കാർട്ട് അവിടെയൊക്കെ കിട്ടുമല്ലോ planter, your normal pots to carry the plants. So I have a planter. I'm planting some plants. On top of it, on the bottom of it, I have another planter. I'm planting some more crops. So like this, I have a vertical arrangement of layered plants, vertical arrangement of stacked layers of plants, a vertical arrangement of stacked layers of plants where agriculture is being done in a controlled environment. That word is very, very important. In a controlled environment. I repeat, it is a practice in which the crops are grown in vertically stacked layers in a controlled environment. In a controlled environment. Why do I say that it is a controlled environment? Why? Understand, I told you that we are talking about a small, maybe a room, maybe a garden. Now, this will be somewhere present in Kerala. This will be present somewhere in Kerala. Kerala is not good for apple cultivation or orange cultivation, or for that matter, dragon fruit cultivation. Dragon fruit, you know dragon fruit, no? Dragon fruit is there. Dragon fruit. So these things, this climate, this tropical humid climate of Kerala is not fit for these kinds of foods. But when you are having vertical farming techniques, which is practiced in a controlled environment, you can set up maybe a cold environment within that room. Maybe you can set up a cold environment within that room so that it is conducive for the growth of apple and dragon fruit. It is always a controlled atmosphere. It's like your room. Inside the room, what are you doing? You are practicing agriculture. You can control the temperature of that room. You can control the water requirements. Rain will not affect that place. Excessive sun will not affect the place. It's a controlled environment. It's a human controlled environment. This is the first benefit behind vertical farming. The atmosphere is human. The second thing is, so that brings me to the second point, which is what are the we are controlling the environment, fine. We are controlling the techniques behind vertical farming. So what are the different types of vertical farming, or what are the different techniques of vertical farming? Techniques of vertical farming. Number one, I have a very important thing which is called as hydroponics. 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 Now, before getting into these things, one more small word alone let me introduce. One more small word alone let me introduce here. One more small word alone let me introduce here. That is soilless farming technique. Soilless farming technique. In one corner of your book, or maybe as a separate box, maybe you can write this soilless farming technique. Hydroponics is a soilless farming technique. The first thing we need to know is what is soilless farming technique, and then we'll come to what is hydroponics. So from the name itself, we can understand soilless technique in Parambo, growing plants without soil. Growing plants without soil as a medium, without soil as a medium. how can a plant grow without soil? That's another natural question. How can a plant grow without a soil? There comes the important role which is played by water. What does soil do? Soil gives you all the nutrients. Soil gives the plants every nutrient. So we are supplying the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate fertilizers. Apart from sulfur based fertilizers, we are supplying all of this through the soil so that the plants can absorb them, right? What if we are directly applying all of this to the water? What if plants can grow in water? So what we are doing is we are giving the plant to grow in a medium, in a water-based medium, which is filled with nutrients. That is called as the technique of hydroponics. So if you want a proper definition, it is the method of growing plants without soil, where water-based medium is used to supply the nutrient rich water, or to supply the plants with nutrients, to supply the plants with nutrients. We are sending the nutrients along with the water. So what sort of nutrients is supplied? Mostly components like nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus. These are the substances which is usually supplied. And this is a technique of vertical farming where soil is not used. And the yield, they have observed that the yield is also considerably higher. So they will be actually be growing in plain water. Water is the basic medium. But apart from that, we also support some, or we also send along with the water, we send some inert substances for the root systems to be supported. For the root system to be supported. Now, inert substances, put it within double quotes, for the root system to be supported. What are those inert substances? Like number gas, atmosphere, we have something called as inert gas. As such, that inert gas is not going to be doing anything great for human lives. I mean, namaka breathe inert gas is not going to do anything. Inert എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ that substance is not going to be actively involved in the process, whatever process. That substance, when it is not actively involved, we call it as inert. For that matter, nitrogen is also a bit of inert gas, but it's like an inactive substance. It's not an inert gas, but it is inactive. So in that manner, some inert substances are sent along with the water for the root systems to be supported. What sort of inert substances? Clay pellets. Clay pellets. Some vermiculture substances. Some vermiculture substances. Okay, so these are things which is being supplied along with water. All right. So this is the idea behind hydroponics. This is the idea behind hydroponics. Now, what is the advantage behind it? What are the disadvantages behind it? The advantage is land water efficiency. See, first point is land water efficiency. First thing is we are not having what do you call, infinite amount of land and infinite amount of water. Both these resources are very, very limited. Both these natural resources are very, very limited. Especially when I'm talking about land, the pressure on land is too high. And also because of climate, are you taking all of this as running notes? Whatever I'm telling, certain word for word. Don't write big sentences word for word. Small words here and there, you take it down. because and if the speed goes a bit high, just tell me to reduce the not dictating, but the speed of me talking. Now, fine. Stop. Yes, land and water. Land and water as a resource. So, and also with a lot of climate change which is happening, with a lot of climate change which is happening, the environmental vagaries, vagaries of land that's faced by land is too high. We do not know when there will be a flood. We do not know when there will be a drought. Climate change is happening, and therefore we cannot have an agriculture like what is being practiced in India. We cannot have a completely climate dependent agriculture. It's time that we develop, or we move from climate dependent agriculture to climate resilient agriculture. It's high time that we undertake this transition. One of the best ways in which we can undertake this transition is by following such new age farming practices, which is not heavily dependent on the two principal resources, land and the three, what do you call, the land is not getting wasted, because we are having the technique in the form of a vertical stacking. Therefore, I can say, follow this, yield per unit area will be maximum. Yield per unit area will be maximum. Why? In that same area, understand like this. Suppose I have a bunch of books. Not okay, bunch of books. I'm having Lakshmikant, I'm having Kullar, I'm having Savindra Singh. In the table in front of me, very practical example, Anna. In the table in front of me, I am arranging this individually. One space for Kullar, next adana occupy cheyda mattoru space I'm keeping quality Lakshmikant book, Ramesh Singh book, and having a Bipin Chandra book, everything I'm spreading in the table. Instead of this, if I'm stacking the books one above the other, if I am placing the books, if I'm stacking the books one above the other, the space consumption, the space utilization is going to be minimum. Same concept apply here. The yield per unit area in one single area, I'm having a vertical arrangement of my plants. Therefore, yield per unit area will be maximum in the case of vertical farming practices. Therefore, land is not that much exploited when compared to conventional techniques. Land exploitation or land utilization is done in a most efficient manner with regard to vertical farming practices. Coming to water utilization, only that required amount of water is supplied to the plants. Water is not like, it's not flooded with water. എപ്പോഴാണ് water ആവശ്യം, that is how water is set. So the water use efficiency is maximum, land use efficiency is maximum. Also, understand another point, fertilization. Remember, I used a term fertigation while we were talking about drip irrigation. While we were talking about discussing about drip irrigation, I utilized a term called as fertigation. So here also, it's like fertilizer. I am supplying it along with my water, and therefore the efficient use of fertilizers is also maximum with regard to these types of hydroponics. The next point is, or the next advantage is, that is very much suitable for urban areas. Why? Urban areas, already there is a pressure on land. There is a problem with excessive land pollution also. So in that case, I cannot conduct agriculture in an urban area. In that case, I can practice something like vertical farming in urban area. Okay. So these are the different advantages with regard to hydroponics, especially with regard to, now these are broad advantages, Anna. You can write it for hydroponics, you can write it for vertical farming practices also. What are the drawbacks of it? What are the drawbacks of this? First thing is, it needs some skill. It's a very skilled practice, Anna. It's a very scientific practice. It's a skilled practice. Therefore, you need to learn it before practicing it. You need to learn the skill before practicing it. The second thing is, minute attention needs to be given at all times. Water, the quality, is it all right? Uh, Fertilizer, is it needed now or not? Minute attention, always it's required. Skilling is maximum. It can be done in a scientific manner. Therefore, skilling is maximum. Then, suppose in the absence of electricity, how will I pump the water? Water, and therefore we also talked about controlled environment conditions. We also talked about controlled. Is my voice clear? Is there any issue with the voice? It's coming. My internet is unstable. If at all there is issue with the voice, just put it. Right. There is a case that it's energy intensive. Why? Electricity, namakka avashyana, because we were talking about controlled human environment. What if we need to reduce the temperature? We need electricity. What if we need to pump water? We need electricity. So at all times, we are highly dependent on electricity. It's an energy intensive process, or you can say it's highly dependent on electricity, as it is a human controlled, as we have to set up a human controlled environment. The next thing is, the next character is, not all plants can be grown vertical farming practices. We cannot imagine a commercial rice farming that can be done, or commercial grain farming that can be done using vertical farming techniques. So these are some of the horticultural crops you can grow. Some of the veggies you can grow, veggies and fruits you can grow. But grain farming, is it commercially viable? That is yet to be seen. That brings me to the next point, or the next type of vertical farming, number 2, aeroponics. Now we'll read aquaponics and then we will come to aeroponics. Aquaponics. Aquaponics. What is the difference? Right now we studied about hydroponics. Now we are reading about aquaponics. Essentially, what is aquaponics? What is aquaponics? How is it different from hydroponics? Understand, hydroponics, I'm just utilizing water for growing my crops. When I'm utilizing, or you can say, aquaponics is a combination of hydroponics plus aquaculture. It is a combination of hydroponics plus aquaculture. What does that mean? I'm utilizing whatever we have dealt in hydroponics, the same thing I'm applying here also. But I am indulging in fish cultivation. Fish cultivation. So in a system where I'm growing some crops, I also indulge in the component of fish cultivation. Okay, so what happens is, it is a combination of hydroponics plus aquaculture, where there is a symbiotic relationship between my fishes and plants. The waste of the fishes, which is the feces material, where the feces material of the fish is seen as a fertilizer for the plants. And the plants, in turn, they will absorb certain nutrients, and they will cleanse the water for the fishes to grow. They will absorb certain waste materials from the water. They will cleanse the water, and that will help the fishes grow. So there is a symbiotic relationship between my fishes and the plants. So this is the idea behind aquaponics. Now let's look at the advantages and the drawbacks of it. First thing, advantages. The advantages is, as you know, it's environmental friendly because in a single system, I'm having both veggies and fruits, and I'm getting fish also. So it's environment friendly. It's environment friendly, and much of pollution. If I'm, let's say, if I'm going to have aquaculture alone in a certain field, aquaculture alone in a certain field. Now this will create a lot of fish waste, which will which will pollute the atmosphere, if you are close to a coastal place, you will know this. Like, I belong to Kanyakumari, and I know this. Like, if you are having a fish farm nearby, they will always process the water, the water where the fishes are growing. They will always process the water. So whenever this water is removed and fresh water is pumped in, they will send the used water maybe to a river or a lake or something. And the whole area, maybe 5 kilometers circumference, that whole area will smell very, 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 very bad. So this kind of polluting the river system, polluting the water bodies, that can be avoided because the fish is grown along with hydroponics, and the waste of the fish will be utilized by the plants because it will serve as a nutrient for the plants. So this is environment friendly. The wastewater will not be pumped in the water bodies. So it's environment friendly. The second thing is, we are utilizing for the plants. We are not utilizing some external fertilizer. We are not utilizing much much quantities of external fertilizers, because we are taking the fish waste as a fertilizer for my plants. Fish fecus is filled with nutrients. Fish fecus, it is filled with nutrients, and therefore that itself will act as a fertilizer for my plants. It is, next point is, it is extremely water efficient. It is extremely water efficient, and it is extremely space efficient also. So that's the advantage behind aquaponics. Now coming to disadvantages. Now coming to disadvantages. Disadvantages. Again, aquaponics എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഹൈഡ്രോപോണിക്സ് തന്നെ അതൊരു സ്പെഷ്യലൈസ്ഡ് സ്കില്ലാണ്. Not everybody can indulge in it. It needs proper skilling of the individual, and only skilled persons can engage in commercial hydroponics. Now, aquaponics is one step greater than that. It's like if hydroponics is 12th standard level, aquaponics is degree level. So it needs even more skilling. It needs even more skilling. It's a very complex system. Therefore, skilling is very much important. Application, coming to the application point of view, not every plant can be grown in this system. Not every plant can be grown along with fishes. It is not suitable for tuberous plants. This can apply even for hydroponics. Root vegetables, like I cannot grow potato in a hydroponic or an aquaponic. Getting me? You cannot grow a potato, which is definitely a root vegetable. I cannot grow it in my aquaponics or hydroponics. So that's one disadvantage. And there are it's again very much electricity dependent. It's very much electricity dependent. The It's highly prone to losses, because if some changes happen in the water, maybe if in the quality of the water, if there is some changes, we are not talking about plants, we are talking about fishes. Fishes are very, very sensitive to changes in the environment, changes in the water conditions. Any small change in the water also, that entire aquaponic farm will be heavily affected. The fishes will immediately die if there is any change in the conditions of the water. Therefore, it's highly prone to failures, risks. It's highly prone to failures or risks. All right. So that is about my aquaponics discussion. Yes, that's about it. Now let's move on to the next important soilless farming technique, which is aeroponics. Number three, let me write it. Number three, aeroponics. Any doubts in the discussion that we had so far? Any doubts? Let me take a quick feedback from you. Any doubts here on these two slides, on these two things that we dealt? Pretty clear, Anu? Can I go ahead? Next topic. Fine then. Okay. We'll go ahead to the next topic, which is aeroponics. Aeroponics. From the name itself, we can understand something. It is dependent on air. It is dependent on your natural air. So here, soil is not used. The roots, it's a technique in which the roots are suspended in air. We are not talking about soil. We are not talking about water-based cultivation. We are talking about plants being suspended in air. So you may ask a question. There is no water also. There is no soil also. How will the plants grow? They need something to get the nutrients from. Essentially, what is happening here is we will be spraying nutrient-rich water. We will be spraying nutrient-rich water. So aeroponics is a farming practice. It's a vertical farming practice in which the roots are suspended in the air, and it's again a soilless farming technique. There is no presence of soil. It is a soilless farming technique. The idea behind this is the roots of the plants are directly sprayed with water, which is nutrient rich water. Okay, so that is about aeroponics. So this is about aeroponics. Now, what about the disadvantages and what about the advantages? First of all, advantages. Advantages എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ the water consumption. Water consumption is heavily reduced. 98% of reduction in water utilization. That's what it's been declared. That the water usage is about 98% lesser than your other methods of farming. The other techniques, like if I'm talking about water hydroponics or aquaponics, from that there is almost around 98% reduction in water consumption. See, already you have to understand something. Already hydroponics and aquaponics namada conventional method pole alla water requirement ulladu. Already the water requirement for these vertical farming techniques is very low. Aeroponics is one step higher. It requires absolutely very less amount of water. So the water usage is highly minimalistic, 98% reduction. Similarly, fertilizer usage is also reduced by almost 60%. Pesticides are fully eliminated. This is very important. Pesticides are fully eliminated as the absence of soil reduces the chance of growth of pest. Pest evideya varunathu? Suppose let's say I have a soil and only in that soil I will have some pest. If it is hanging in the mid-air, if this plant is hanging in the mid-air, where will the pest come from? Yes, there can be pest, but the pesticide in the parina, we can control the pest. It's not like some grasshopper will come and attack this. It's of course controlled by humans. Humans will control any amount of pest which is present in that single garden or something. So definitely pesticides are fully eliminated, as the absence of soil reduces the chance of development of pest and development of any new diseases. The next point is, it is completely prevented from any climatic impact. Like if we have a drought, that's not going to affect my aeroponics. If I'm having a flood, that's not going to affect it. So if I'm going to have a heat wave also, if I'm going to have a heat wave mid-summer, it's a midsummer, but in spite of it, I can grow comfortably my veggies and fruits in that aeroponic farm. So it's completely free from climate susceptibility. It is completely free from climate susceptibility. Similarly, I need not worry about any pest attack also. Locust attack. Very recently, we had locust attack all across the regions of Rajasthan and parts of Gujarat. So this locust attack kind of things will not be present with regard to aeroponics. The next advantage is faster yield. Faster yield. The aeroponically grown plants, they can be harvested at a 3 times faster pace. They can be harvested at a 3 times faster pace when compared to the other methods. Okay, so these are the advantages behind my aeroponics. Now coming to the disadvantages. First thing, skilling is very important. Second thing, technology dependence is very important. It's highly dependent on technology. Third one, um, when I'm talking about all these three farming practices, hydroponics, aquaponics or aeroponics, the initial cost of setting up is pretty high. The initial investment is pretty high. It's very, very expensive. So it's almost about it stretches up to the cost of investment stretches up to uh, 8 crore per hectare. So this kind of huge investment, only rich farmers or rich individuals or maybe some corporate companies, they can indulge in such a kind of investment, and not your regular farmers. And not your regular farmers. It requires constant monitoring. So whatever conditions, because it's human controlled, you should be always paying your attention with regard to the climate, the microclimate. We call it as the microclimate. The microclimate within the aeroponic system, the microclimate conditions within the aeroponic system, we need to be monitoring it throughout. So these are the general disadvantages behind my aeroponics. All right. So that covers my current affairs based discussion with regard to agriculture, more or less. Yes, I think I've covered whatever I wanted to cover with regard to your prelims. Also, this will be helpful with regard to your mains as well as with regard to your options. These things will be helpful. Right. So yesterday we dealt about agroclimatic, agroecological regionalization. Today we dealt about these things. Uh, cropping intensity, cropping patterns also, cropping systems also. Right. So that completely covers that small portions of agriculture which I have left long back. Most of it has been covered. Now we are moving on to another part of industry chapter. That is my economic geography chapter, there is a heading called as limits to growth. There is a topic called as limits to growth theory. Limits to growth theory. Uh, I don't think this has been done in your models and theories classes, right? Has limits to growth theory been done in your models and theory classes? No, no, fine. So we'll go ahead with it. Limits to growth theory. Um, take down limits to growth as a part of economic geography, All right, take down. Now, first of all, let's discuss about some of the initial ideas behind this theory. The concept, limits to growth. What does that mean? Now, they are talking about, so we are in somewhere around post your Second World War. That's the time period that we are talking about, post Second World War. What actually happened is intense industrialization, too much of urbanization, searching for markets. Immediately, war kindled the animal spirits, the economic spirits of human. And there was some intense industrialization and urbanization, finding new age markets, everything was going on. At that time, the people thought we will utilize the resources to the maximum, get maximum benefit out of my resources. I will achieve maximum industrialization, I will achieve maximum urbanization, I can maximize my profits. This was the ideology. This was the ideology. But they understood, close to 1960s, they understood growth cannot take place uncontrollably. They understood growth cannot take place uncontrollably. There is a concept of environment which we need to think about, because whatever resources are present in this world, it is not an unlimited set of resources. இது ஒரு finite resources ആണ്. The natural resources which we have is very much finite in nature, and therefore we have to utilize the resources judiciously. The growth, what they initially thought after your Second World War, they thought that it can be an infinite growth. We can achieve and maximize the profits infinitely. They thought that growth is infinite, but then they understood, close to 1960s, they understood that it cannot be an infinite growth, and there are some certain limits to growth. There are certain limits to growth. In about 1960s, in the late 1960s, a concept developed where environmentalism came into existence. Environmentalism, the idea got further strengthened in the economic geography side. The idea of environmentalism further strengthened in the economic geography side. An organization that came up was Club of Rome. I'm sure you might have heard of Club of Rome during when in your studies of environment. So there is this concept, or there is this idea of Club of Rome, which is an informal organization. So they set up this particular organization to understand how policymakers, how so this group, understand very clearly, this Club of Rome group, it's actually a club of certain learned people, policymakers, scientists, economists, learned people, policymakers, scientists, economists, industrialist, and civil servants, or bureaucrats coming together, forming a club just to discuss how how policy making how policy making will affect my economic environment, natural environment, political environment, how the world can sustainably produce substances, keeping in mind the future needs of the world, keeping in mind the future generations. We can, in a way, say that the concept of sustainable development came into being after this discussion with regard to um, Club of Rome, because we had something in the 1972. What happened? What conference took place in the year of 1972 with regard to sustainable development? With regard to sustainable development, something happened here during 1972. Heard of Rio conference, Stockholm conference, Rio declaration? Yes. Yes. Have your environment people taught it? Yes. So more or less, your Rio conferences, which talked about sustainable development, Stockholm conferences, again, which focused on sustainable development, Stockholm conferences. Now, these things came up much later. So we can say Club of Rome is an initial, uh, it's a club making up these people whose primary focus is how to interlink the concepts of policy making and um, the economics of a nation, the politics of a nation, and the environment of a nation. The economic, how policy making can be linked with political geography, economic geography, and human geography. So this was the idea behind the Club of Rome, and from there onwards, the concept which came into being, or which was given birth after Club of Rome, is the concept of sustainable development. And this limits to growth, this concept limits to growth, it's actually a book. It's actually a book which was published after this Club of Rome discussion. And for the first publishing of this book of limits to growth, L2G, um, the first publishing of the book was in 1972. Understand something? It's not just a theory, it's actually a book. We are learning the book as a theory, but the idea is limits to growth എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഈ ഒരു idea is actually published in the form of a book. The first printing was in the year of 1972. The people who are involved behind limit to growth theory, the first person, let's first of all start with the very first person, the pioneer, J. Forrester. J. Forrester was an American computer engineer, and he understood that it's not advisable. This uncontrolled urbanization, deforestation that we have, this is not going to lead us anywhere, and the world is going to end up in a crisis if we are going to keep continuing what we are doing today. So this concept was, first of all, that idea that the natural resources are getting depleted and we need to do something about it was brought about by Forrester's work. And in the year of 1972, so this guy published a new research paper. He published a research paper, and that formed as a basis for the development of ideologies with respect to Club of Rome. That instigated this research paper published by Forrester, instigated Club of Rome people to come together and think about how the global policy making is affecting the environment. After that came up the book of Limits to Growth by Donella Meadows, by Donella Meadows, and write it here, by Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows. By Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows. Now understand, Donella and Dennis are husband and wife. So, and the book that they released was Limits to Growth, which is about how mankind can sustainably produce goods and services, how industries and how economic geography can continue in a sustainable manner. All right, so this is my quick introduction with regard to this theory. Now, limits to growth has got certain assumptions. Um, we can write in this format. We can write in this format. The limits to growth theory has got 5 basic assumptions. Now we are getting into the actual theory. Whatever we have been discussing so far, it's basically my introduction part, and now we are getting into the theory. It has got 5 basic assumptions. It has got 5 input variables, and it has got some five runs. What is meant by all of this? We will come to that individually, but right now take down this flowchart L2G, 5 basic assumptions, 5 input variables, and 5 runs. So as per this theory, okay, have you taken this flowchart? Follow me after that. Follow me after that. Limits to growth theory says nature had set a limit, and beyond which if you are exceeding, and beyond this limit if the humans are going, it will definitely lead to world crisis. This is the limit to growth. Do not grow beyond a limit. I repeat, this theory says that nature has set a limit. If humans are trying to exceed that limit, it will lead to crisis, world crisis. So that is growth with a certain limit. And it was developed by Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows. And as I've told you, there are 5 basic assumptions. First of all, let's talk about the 5 basic assumptions. 5 basic assumptions. The first assumption is, just a second. The first assumption is resources are finite. Number one, finite resources. Resources are limited. There are only limited resources available in the earth. There are only limited resources available in the earth. And the next point is limited agricultural land. Limited agricultural land. Land is not an infinite resource. Land is also very much limited. And Adilayum, if I'm talking about agricultural land, fertile land, that is even more limited, right? So there is a limited agricultural land. Next assumption is Earth has limited capacity to absorb or to consume the global pollution. Earth has limited capacity to consume the global pollution. The next important assumption is, just a second, I'll come right now. The next important assumption is limited capacity to consume the pollution. That's the third point. Pollution. Let me write it here. Pollution is limited. Number four, the model does not give importance to recycling and pollution control mechanism. That's the next assumption. The model does not give much importance to recycling and pollution control mechanism. And the last assumption is number five. Number five. Number five. The last assumption is it does not give importance to technology and innovation to improve you can just write like this. It does not give much importance to new age technology and innovation. It does not give much importance to new age technology and innovation. All right, so these are the basic assumptions. These are the basic assumptions. Now, next thing that we discussed is five input variables. Five input variables. So that's what we are going to discuss now. Input variables. Okay. First, number one. See, it's an input. Understand something before we go any further. Just put a small point. Where did I start? This one, limits to growth theory. It is a system analysis. Like if I say that I am having a system, a computer system, I am giving an input, I am getting an output. It is a system. ഇതാണ് നമ്മുടെ കമ്പ്യൂട്ടർ ഇങ്ങനെയാണ് ഇത് വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. Input I'm giving, I'm getting an output. So what is the computer doing? It's processing certain information, right? Limits to growth theory is also something like this. The theory is not like it's not like, what can I say? It's not like my division theory or Peng's theory that I have a step-by-step process like this. No, it is completely input dependent. What is the input that I'm giving? What is the input that I'm giving? അതിന്റെ അനുസരിച്ചാണ് ഒരു ഔട്ട്പുട്ട് കിട്ടുന്നത്. Now you may think this sounds simple, but the idea is the inputs can be a mixture of two things. So the output can also differ. So I cannot say that this is what I'll be getting. No, because it depends on a series of inputs. It depends on a multiple inputs that I'm giving. Suppose let's say that I am giving you what I am. Okay, you are, as a civil service aspirant, you are just studying history alone. So as an input, you are concentrating only with regard to ancient, medieval, and modern Indian history. That's your only input. Your output, if it is going to be a history test, your output is going to be maximum. But your output, if the input is subject is history, the subject that you have learned is history, but the test, which is also one of the input, the test is maybe geography. Okay, so this is also an input, this is also an input. So what will happen at the end when I'm getting the output will be like zero, because you have prepared so much for history, but you have left out geography. So in that case, it is multiple inputs ആണ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. So depending on the multiplicity of the inputs, my output will vary. This theory is based on predicting the future. If this are my inputs, what will be my output? How will my future earth will look like? If I have this technology, if I am utilizing resources at this kind of a rate, what will be my future? How will my future Earth look like? Will there be a crisis? Will there not be a crisis? A predictive, technology or a predictive theory നമ്മുടെ limits to growth theory. It is more projection. It's more like um, a projection of what is going to happen in the future. It's more like a projection of what is going to happen in the future given this kinds of inputs. Are you understanding this? This is a very important concept. It's not like a hard and fast theory. Theory in Parambo, let's say, if I'm talking about Pythagoras theorem, uh, my hypotenuse will be a root of a square plus b square. So this is Pythagoras theorem. If I take this theorem to Mount Everest, also it will apply. If I take this theorem to my to below the sea level, and if I'm working there, also it will apply. It's a universal truth. It's a universal truth. പക്ഷെ നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന ഈ ലിമിറ്റ്സ് ടു ഗ്രോത്ത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഇതൊരു യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ ട്രൂത്ത് അല്ല. It is highly input dependent, and it's like a future എങ്ങനെയാണോ if this is my input, how will my future look? How will my future projections look? So it's more like a prediction. It's more like a projection of what might happen in the future. Okay. So what can be my input variables? What can be my input variables? The first input variable is population. The second one is pollution. Third one, per capita food availability. Fourth one, per capita industrial production. And the last one is amount of natural resources, non-renewable resources, availability of natural or non-renewable resources. These are my inputs. Depending on this input, my computer will process, my system will process, and it will give me a considerable output. This is what we call it as a systems analogy. It is like if you have done some bit of engineering, you would know about simulations. What is simulation? I am giving this kind of an input. How is my output going to be? That is simulation. If I'm writing a C++ program, I am trying to simulate how my output is going to be. So this is basically simulations. It is this entire theory is basically dependent on simulation. Population, if it is going to be high, pollution is going to be high, what will be my output? How will be my future world? It will be in a crisis. Population is high, depletion of natural resources is high, what will be my future world? How will it look like? Again, disastrous situation on. So definitely how my input is going to play a role in output, that decides my simulations. So if the industrial production keeps on increasing, then what will happen to my pollution? Obviously pollution will also increase. Then both of them increase, what will happen to my future world? Sustainable or will it be destructive? It will lead to a world crisis. So these kinds of processing the inputs and coming up with a with an output, with a final output, is what this limits to growth theory is trying to answer. This point is clear, this point of assumptions and input variables, so that we can move ahead with the theory. This is a very simple theory, not actually very difficult theory. All difficult theories are gone. This is like very simple. Yes, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. Right, let's go ahead. First one. So now we are coming on to the last and the final component here. Assumptions കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ we went on to read about the variables. And what is this 5 runs? What do you mean by runs? Yes, now you call, if you have done a bit of computers in your class 11 and 12, they would ask you input കൊടുത്തിട്ടുണ്ട്, output in the lab, in the computer lab, they will ask you, you have written the program, now please run your program. They ask you to run your program, right? So runs is actually simulations. I am having a desired number of inputs. Now, please run the program and let's see what is going to be the condition of the world given these kinds of inputs. Given these kinds of inputs, what will be my simulation? What will be my output? The 5 runs, the 5 simulations or 5 outputs, anything like that you can take. So the first condition or the first simulation or the first run number 1. Run one. I presume that you understood what is run. In programming language, we say run the program. So run എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു simulation ആണ്. Please give the computer a certain set of inputs and run the program. Let's see what the output is. Run one. The input that was given was the world is with current standard variables. We are talking about 1972 conditions. The world with current standard variables. What will happen if the world continue to be in this situation? What will happen if we are continuing to exploit the resources in this manner? What will happen if we are continuing to exploit the technology in this manner? What will be the condition of the world? That is run number 1. And in run number 1, the following outputs were found. The following outputs were found. There was an increase in industrialization. There was an increase in industrialization. Write it in bullets. Increase in industrialization. When industrialization increase, naturally there will be pollution rise. Naturally there will be pollution rise. There will be increased capital expenditure for all the missions that you are spending. For all the missions that you are spending. It will lead to excessive exploitation of resources. So resource depletion will happen. And all of this will lead to world system to collapse. If I am continuing with the current standard variables, these things will happen and finally my world system will collapse. This is my input. This all are my output. This is run number 1. This is run number 1. Now let's move on to run number 2. Run 2. The input is doubled natural resource. Doubled natural resource. How can I double my natural resource? Understand, maybe because of increased innovation and technology, if I'm able to exploit some natural resource, what will be the case with that? Okay, due to from the first run, maybe there is a decrease in natural resource. So in this run, in the second run, using technology, if I'm doubling the exploitation, if I'm doubling the resource exploitation, then what will be my outcomes? Outputs. First of all, outputs. The first point is, of course, pollution will increase. Of course, pollution will increase because of industrial production will increase, because of which pollution will increase. Now, because of high pollution, some related deaths will rise. To compensate this pollution, to compensate this rise in death, and to compensate the labor which is related, which is required for industrial production, I repeat, to compensate for this rise in death and to compensate for this rise of industrial production, labor requirement, there will be a case of high population growth also. Understand something? Uh, Maybe in a bracket you can write this: limits to growth accepts Marxian ideology. Marxian ideology of population growth. That is, more labor is beneficial for industries. It's a capitalistic world. So that ideology has been accepted by limits to growth. So high population growth will happen. Now, doubling of resources, the resources will sustain only for a certain period of time. So it will be the doubled resource. The doubled resource will be enough only for a few years. After that, the resource will be gone forever. All of this will result in world system collapse. One day or another, the world system will collapse. This is the output with regard to run number 2. All right, let's move to the third run. Run 1 and run 2, is this clear? We have 3, 4, and 5 runs. Run 1 and 2 is clear? Yes, perfect. We shall go to run 3. We shall go to run 3. It assumed unlimited natural resource with pollution control measure. They are assuming not doubling natural resource. They are going to assume as if the natural resource is going to be present for an unlimited long time. Unlimited natural resource. But നമുക്ക് നേരത്തെ ഉള്ള മറ്റ് run 1 പിന്നെ run 2 there was a normal, there was a recurring problem, and the problem was industrial pollution. So what we'll do right now is we will give the input to the system that we are assuming unlimited natural resource with pollution control. So now the problems will be reduced. Now the problems will be reduced if this is the condition that we are following. So then they simulated, they made the system to run, and they came up with certain outputs. The output is whatever you do, because you assumed unlimited natural resource, which means at the end of the day, you are going to exploit the natural resource, and that will lead to, and here you are assuming unlimited natural resource, so you are going to exploit the unlimited natural resource. So whatsoever pollution control measure you take, definitely the pollution problem will persist. Whatever pollution control mechanism that you take, because you're going to exploit unlimited natural resource, the pollution problem will persist. Another thing is, because you are going to exploit unlimited natural resource, industries will multiply at a whole new level. Industries will multiply at a whole new level, and therefore agricultural land will become minimum and food scarcity problems will occur. Agricultural land, agricultural land will become minimum, therefore food scarcity problems will begin to occur. So these are broadly, and food scarcity and pollution both will is not good for human environment. Both are not good for human lives. Therefore, that will also lead to world system collapse. In the long run, this run 3 will also lead to world system collapse. That finally they thought, okay, so the problem is food. Food problem alone, if we tackle this somehow, at least we can manage the world. That's what the next input is going to assume. Run 4 takes into account assuming unlimited natural resource, pollution control measure, and high food productivity techniques. Food scarcity ആണല്ലോ നമുക്ക് run 3 basic problem. Pollution is always a problem. But at least here we are coming up with a new human-based problem, which is food scarcity. So let's improve. The run 4 is, the input is high food productivity technique. Now here, the problem is happening again because of high pollution, industrial pollution, because of unlimited natural resource, due to the presence of large number of industries, you're going to have high industrial pollution. And this collective pollution becomes so high, that the environment is completely degraded, and food productivity cannot be increased after a certain limit. Environment degraded how can you keep on increasing the food productivity of the land? So food productivity also suffers a decline because of general environment being degraded. So finally, that is also going to lead to world system collapse. Run 4 is also a disaster, because at the end of the day, we unlimited natural resource use another, which means I'm going to exploit it, which means I'm going to have some lots of industries, which means it will lead to industrial pollution. That will degrade my environment, and therefore, endumatram food productivity technique introduced at the end of the day, it's not going to be beneficial, because my environment at the end of the day is degraded completely. This is run 4. So finally, that brings to the last run 5. Run 5, no assumption of unlimited natural resource. And assuming rational growth. Assuming rational growth. Now, no assumption of unlimited resources and assuming rational growth in Paraipo, we are talking about parts of Earth being an isolated region. Why? Being an isolated region. because resources limited on it. It's not like unlimited resources. There can even be scarcity of some resources. Suppose, let's say, I am talking about um, I'm talking about maybe Odisha. Odisha has got excellent iron and iron resources. It can produce a lot of iron and steel. It can also produce some good qualities of rice and millets. But if Odisha, at the end of the day, if Odisha needs some coconut, it has to borrow it from Kerala. If Odisha needs rubber, it has to borrow things from Kerala. But in Run 5, we are assuming as if all of the individual regions are operating as if it is an isolated region. There is no unlimited resources. The resources can be very, very, very limited, and at times it can be even scarce. This indicates that the parts of Earth are operating as if it is an isolated region because of limitations of resources, limitation of food, and etc. As a result, if one region, one part of the earth is not going to cooperate with another part of the world, if India is not going to cooperate with America, with Odisha, if Odisha is not going to cooperate with Kerala, then again it will lead to world system collapse because for sustainable development, we need to have equitable sharing of resources. And if your regions are going to perform in the form of isolated regions, then also world system will collapse. Then also world system will collapse. So they finally came to the conclusion, limits to growth finally came to the conclusion that there can be no rational growth. There can be no unlimited growth. That would be the better word. There can be no unlimited growth because you have a series of inputs. You have a series of inputs which is definitely blocking my growth. You have a series of variable inputs which is definitely blocking my growth. So sustainable concept is the only way to move ahead. Importance of limits to growth എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ two things you need to write, that uh, unlimited growth is finally understood to be unsustainable. So the concept of sustainable development was developed because of this theory of limit to growth, which was developed in the Club of Rome. This theory forced people to think about the problem of environmental degradation. So 2 points, unsustainable or growth cannot be without limits. There is limits for growth. There is certain limits for growth. Therefore, we have to think about the concept of sustainable development. And the next point is it forced people to think about the concept of environmental degradation. So now we are going to have another subheading, which is criticism of limits to growth theory. Criticism of this theory. It was an alarming report. The limits to growth theory was a very alarming report that predicted, please take this down. The limits to growth theory was an alarming report that predicted the collapse of the world economy in the 21st century. It had considerable impact on economic and political thinking, and provided an impetus. Impetus nu parayumbo push. It provided an impetus nu parayumbo it gave further push, provided an impetus to anti-growth sentiment. You cannot have growth at an irrational basis. It gave a push to, it gave an impetus to anti-growth sentiment. Importance is to be given with respect to environment as well. In importance is to be given with respect to environment as well. In fact, this theory divided the world into two groups. Number one, or you can write it like A, B, resource pessimist and resource optimist. Resource pessimist and resource optimist. Resource pessimist എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ resources are very less in number, please do not utilize it. അങ്ങനെ പറയുന്ന ഒരു സെറ്റ് ഓഫ് ആൾക്കാർ. പിന്നെ resource optimist എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ we can use the resources are available in plenty. So there have been two sets of people who got developed. Now, coming to the very negative criticisms, the one thing is they did not take into account, this theory did not take into account that through innovation, we can reduce the pollution to a significant level. So we have you have what is called as that at that point of time, 1970s, we did not have electrostatic precipitators. So we did not have the catalytic converters. These are all, we do not have scrubbers. These are all pollution controlling devices, which is fit in almost all of your devices, like in cars, in your thermal steel power plants, the thermal power plants, everywhere. So they did not imagine the advantages of having technology, because this kind of technology itself was beyond their scope of imagination. This kind of high technology was beyond their scope of imagination. So they could not think that pollution controlling or such innovative technologies actually existed. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു belief പോലും അവരുടെ അടുത്തില്ല. So they did not have the belief that technology can overcome problem of pollution. The second thing is they did not take into account that food security can be ensured through new innovations. They did not take into account that food security um, can be removed, can be altered, or can be reduced with new innovations. The model is based on inadequate data and empirical information. What they observed, അവർ അന്ന് ആ ഒരു ഡേറ്റിന് എന്താണ് ഒബ്സർവ് ചെയ്തത് അത് വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് they have framed 5 runs. Today, if they are framing the theory, they would know that many technologies have been developed which can control pollution. Similarly, many new age farming practices, like whatever we have discussed today, is all about new age farming practices. They can control, or they can increase the productivity. ഇങ്ങനത്തെ concept ഒക്കെ it was unimaginable for them. It was unimaginable for them. The alternatives of mineral resources can be developed through innovation. This was also an idea which was unknown to them. This was also an idea which was unknown to them. Okay, so that is the broad criticisms with regard to limits to growth theory. Okay, is that clear? Any doubts in any of the topics which we have discussed so far? In short, that concludes my economic geography portion. If at all there is, if there's something that we will continue in the next session. And we will be starting a new topic, a new lesson in the next session. Again, it will be a lot of current affairs will be involved, especially I have prepared notes with regard to 2 3 topics, that is with regard to what I think will be very very important, like with regard to COVID and um, geography. I think this is something that we need to concentrate on, like how geography of a place affects the impact of COVID. And I expect a question from from this domain. And I seriously expect a question from this domain, maybe in your optional or in your GS geography. But there will be a question about how, maybe you can write this down also, how your geography of a place impacts COVID behavior and effects of COVID and effects of COVID affects how this impacts, that is your geography, how it impacts your COVID situation at a particular place. Roughly, you get my point, right? So that's what I've been thinking about. And why is this question? Now, recently I saw a paper, a research paper that was being released by 2 entities. One is by Niti Aayog regarding this aspect, and the other one was by RBI. Two very very important bodies in the country releasing a paper, a research paper, means it is very very important. So it's like a 50-page document. I am preparing notes from this 50-page document. Maybe we will do this. This is an important topic. Maybe we will take this up either on Thursday, that is tomorrow, or we will do this on Saturday. Okay, so that is about this. And then another important current affair topic is with regard to urban floods. Urban floods, uh, heat waves, and then since landslides has been asked in this year's too, um, we can expect some other disasters also. So these are the things which I am preparing notes. Current affairs, entirely paper 9. I mean, chapter number 9 and chapter number 10 is completely current affairs. And as I told you before, chapter number 9, it's that's something that you need to work upon. Will be teach you some basics of it. But chapter 10, I will be doing that in detail. But chapter 9, please, it's completely post independence and stuff like that. We will be giving you notes. Chapter 10 we will do in detail. Is that clear? Is that clear for everybody? Any doubts on the discussion? We have another class also, 6 to 8. We will meet you there. But any doubts now? Can we wind up the class if there is no doubts? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. We'll meet you again in the next class. Thank you.